It's past midnight in the year 1300, and a man is sitting up in the dark with a pair of iron tweezers pressed to his own mouth. He's packed honey around his aching tooth, and he's waiting to catch the worm he's certain is living inside it, chewing the tooth away from the inside. He'll wait all night. Nothing will come because there is no worm. But here's what should stop you. That same man, a peasant who has never owned a toothbrush, never seen a dentist, never once tasted refined sugar, almost certainly had cleaner, stronger teeth than the lord asleep in the castle above him. Everything you picture about medieval teeth is backwards. This is how they actually kept them, and why the poorest mouths in England were the healthiest. Here's the first thing that breaks the movie in your head. That blackened, rotting horror show every film has sold you, the medieval peasant with a mouth full of stumps. For most people, it simply wasn't real. And it gets stranger because a few centuries later, the richest people in England would deliberately rot their own teeth on purpose and pay for the privilege. We'll get there. But first, the peasant with the clean mouth, because he pulled it off with none of what's sitting in your bathroom right now. And the how is weirder than the myth. His toothbrush was a tree. He'd snap a twig off a hazel or a birch, chew one end until the fibers burst apart into a rough little brush, and scrub. And when it wore soft, he'd flip it and work the other end. It sounds primitive until you learn that some of those woods carried compounds that actually killed the bacteria in his mouth. He wasn't just scrubbing. He was, without knowing the word, disinfecting. And this wasn't some backward European trick. Half the world cleaned its teeth this way. In parts of the Middle East and North Africa, people still use that same chew stick today. They call it the miswak. Then came the cloth, a rough strip of linen dragged hard across the teeth and gums with a powder loaded onto it. And we have the actual recipes. Sage crushed with salt crystals was a favorite. Burnt rosemary stems, ground into a black powder, was another. Some people worked pepper, mint, and rock salt into a paste. Everyone followed the same logic. Something gritty to scrub, something sharp to finish. Cinnamon, cloves, mint. A medieval mouth could walk around smelling like a spice cabinet, but some of it was rough. To whiten the teeth and freshen the breath, one common rinse was, stay with me, urine. The ammonia in it actually bleaches, so as revolting as that is, it worked. And if a tooth had already gone bad and you wanted it gone, one medical text told you to boil newts and beetles down into a powder, rub it on with your finger, and the tooth would supposedly fall out on its own, no pain at all. And that was the sane part. Because when it came to what actually caused the pain, medieval medicine believed something far stranger than any of this. They believed in the worm. Picture the pain for a second. It's the middle of the night, your jaw is on fire, and the pain isn't steady. It stabs, then fades, then stabs again, like something inside the tooth is moving. Now imagine you've never heard the word bacteria. What would you conclude? You'd conclude the obvious thing. Something is alive in there. Something is eating it. That's exactly what nearly everyone concluded for thousands of years across cultures that never touched each other. Babylon, Egypt, China, India, and all across medieval Europe. A tiny worm boring into the tooth, slowly eating it from the inside. When the pain went sharp and stabbing, that was the worm thrashing around in there. When the ache faded, it had simply curled up to sleep. It fit everything the pain was doing. The idea sits carved on a Babylonian clay tablet now in the British Museum, written around 3,500 years ago, a prayer against the toothworm, and it did not die until the 1700s. The English pictured it like a little eel. Over in Germany, they swore it was red and gray, like a maggot. And if a worm is eating your tooth from the inside, then scrubbing the outside is beside the point. The only question that matters is how you get it out. So you tried to lure it out. That's the honey and the tweezers from the opening. The man at 3 in the morning holding a hole in his own face, waiting for something to crawl toward the sweetness. When that failed, you tried to smoke it out. You'd heat the seeds of a plant called henbane until they smoldered, then funnel the smoke straight at the bad tooth to drive the worm from its den. Henbane is mildly narcotic, so at the very least it took the edge off while you sat there and hoped. And when nothing worked, when the pain finally broke you, you went to see a man about it. Not a dentist, a barber. The same person who cut your hair also yanked your teeth, opened your veins to bleed you, and stitched you up after a brawl. They were called barber surgeons, and they worked out in the open. You'd sit in a chair in the middle of the market, a crowd would gather to watch, and the barber would reach in with a pair of iron pliers, brace a knee against you, and pull. There was no numbing, no painkiller stronger than whatever wine you'd swallowed first, just a hard grip, a fast pull, and a scream the whole square could hear. And that striped red and white pole still spinning outside barbershops today? The story goes it traces straight back to these men. The red for the blood, the white for the bandages. You've been walking past a tooth-pulling sign your whole life. So that's the man with the ruined mouth. Now meet the man who had it worse, and he lived up in the castle. The peasant's teeth were almost certainly healthier than the lord's, and it came down to a single ingredient: sugar. In the year 1069, it had barely reached England, trickling in along the trade routes of the Crusades, an import so expensive that for centuries only the rich could put it on the table. So the peasant lived on coarse dark bread, dairy, and rough vegetables. A diet with almost nothing in it to feed the bacteria that rot teeth. And we can actually measure this. In 2009, a team led by Remy Esclassan and Anne-Marie Grimaud published a study in Archives of Oral Biology. They had excavated a medieval cemetery at Vilarnau in southern France and examined nearly 1,400 teeth from 58 people who lived and died between the 12th and 14th centuries. The share of teeth with cavities was about 17%. Barely 1 in 6, and what had worn those teeth down wasn't decay. It was the coarse, gritty bread that ground them flat over a lifetime. By most measures, our modern mouths carry more decay than theirs ever did. The Lord, meanwhile, could finally afford the one food on earth that quietly destroys a smile, and he ate it by the spoonful. The higher your rank, the more sugar on your plate, and the worse your mouth. Clean teeth weren't a mark of wealth. They were very often a mark of being poor, and it was about to get much worse. Push forward a couple of centuries into Tudor England, and sugar finally gets cheap enough to rot a whole country at once. The Queen herself, Elizabeth I, had a sweet tooth that became the stuff of legend. She even polished her teeth with a paste made of sugar, which is roughly like fighting a fire with gasoline. By her 60s, her teeth had gone black. In 1598, a German traveler named Paul Hensner met her and wrote it down flatly. Her teeth were black, a fault the English seemed to suffer from, he said, from their great love of sugar. And here's where the whole thing flips inside out. The Queen set every trend at court, so black, rotting teeth became a status symbol, proof you were rich enough to afford sugar. And people who still had clean white teeth, who simply couldn't afford the stuff, started blackening their own with soot to fake it. A whole class of people rotting their smiles on purpose to look like they could afford the thing that was destroying the rich. Now, I have to be straight with you about the edges of this. A lot of the peasant story we pieced together from scraps. A recipe here, a court remedy there, a skull pulled from a churchyard with the wear still on the teeth. The people chewing those twigs mostly couldn't read or write and left no diary behind. Even the Queen's famous black teeth are probably exaggerated. There's really only one solid record of her ever losing one, but the pattern underneath holds and the bones back it up. Before sugar flooded in, medieval mouths were in genuinely good shape, good enough to embarrass most of us. So go back to that bathroom this morning. The mint paste, the nylon brush, the 30 seconds you didn't think about once. For almost the entire history of our species, keeping the teeth in your head meant a frayed twig, a fistful of salt, and a real belief that a worm was living in your skull. They scrubbed with sticks, they rinsed with things you'd never say out loud. And they sat up all night to catch a monster that didn't exist. And a lot of them, the poor ones, the ragged ones, the ones with nothing, smiled with a full, clean set of teeth while the richest man in the county rotted his away for status. The tools got gentler. The worm turned out to be nothing at all. And somewhere along the way, we started paying good money to fix exactly what that peasant got for free.